Welcome to the Clarin Ratio Daily World Brief, available at clarinratio.com. I want you to imagine, just for a moment, dropping a physical toll booth right into the middle of the ocean. Because as of today, July 13, 2026, the United States is rapidly escalating its military presence in the Strait of Hormuz. President Donald Trump has announced a reinstated naval blockade set to begin on Tuesday, July 14. And attached to that blockade is this staggering, really unprecedented demand, which is a 20% fee on all commercial cargo passing through this critical global waterway. The civic and human stakes here are frankly immense. We aren't just looking at a shipping dispute, we are looking at a radical shift in how global power is exercised. Today, we're essentially witnessing the weaponization of choke points, whether those are physical shipping lanes in the Gulf, legal boundaries in Washington courts, or bureaucratic walls blocking human migration. The common thread here is how governments are suddenly redefining who gets to pass through and, well, who has to pay the price. And the facts on the water are moving incredibly fast right now. The U.S. has launched strikes against Iran for a third consecutive night. In that exact same window, the UAE Ministry of Defense confirmed that Iranian cruise missiles struck two commercial tankers, the Mombasa and the Bahia. Tragically, an Indian crew member was killed and 8 others were wounded. Following this, President Trump declared the U.S., quote, the guardian of the Hormuz Strait, claiming this 20% cargo fee is essentially an invoice to the world to cover American security costs.
Right, and the public consequence of locking down this specific choke point translates instantly to your average household. Before the recent conflict erupted back in February, 25% of the world's oil and 20% of global liquefied natural gas traveled through this narrow stretch of water. When you choke off that flow, the translation isn't just abstract geopolitics. It is a direct spike in global inflation and an immediate climb in household energy bills. The markets are actually already reacting, with Brent crude oil surging roughly 7.8% to nearly $81.92 a barrel.
The International Maritime Organization, however, immediately stepped in with a really stark factual counterpoint. They stated there is absolutely no legal basis for mandatory tolls in an international strait. Under United Nations rules, countries only exercise control up to 12 nautical miles from their coastline, and at its narrowest, the shipping lanes of the Strait of Hormuz lie entirely within the territorial waters of Iran and Oman. So the U.S. is attempting to extract a massive global shipping tax completely outside of its own territory. How exactly does the U.S. plan to enforce a 20% tax on the entire world cargo without, completely alienating its allies or triggering a broader naval war?
Well, enforcement requires a sustained, highly aggressive maritime policing operation that basically operates entirely outside of established international law. The United States would have to board, detain, or threaten commercial vessels from allied and adversarial nations alike just to collect this fee. Beyond those mechanics of global trade, though, a severe human toll is unfolding on the water. This strait is not just a chessboard for superpowers, it is a workplace for thousands of people, and local fishermen are bearing the brunt of this militarization.
That human element completely gets lost in the defense briefings. I was reading about a fisherman named Ahmed who has worked near Hormuz Island for 3 decades. He pointed out that when warships move in and missiles start flying, local boats just stay tied to the docks and coastal families simply go hungry.
Yeah, another local fisherman named Khalid noted that they used to watch the weather before going out to fish, but now they watch the news, they watch the naval ships, and the sky. He said fear has become as common as the tide. The militarization of this physical choke point destroys the daily livelihood of entire coastal communities who are really just trying to survive.
Using aggressive executive authority to extract billions from a physical choke point actually mirrors a developing story back in the U.S. today, where a federal judge has just dismantled an attempt to create a massive legal choke point. Today, U.S. District Judge Kathleen Williams in Florida handed down a scathing ruling. She completely nullified a settlement between the U.S. government and Donald Trump, along with his sons, over a lawsuit regarding leaked tax returns.
The sheer mechanics of the agreement they tried to push through are staggering. It would have created a $1.8 billion fund for victims of, quote, government weaponization. Crucially, it simultaneously granted Trump and his corporate entities total immunity from future tax audits.
The specific legal maneuver that offended the court is the part we really need to unpack here. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche essentially spoke for both the plaintiffs and the defendants in crafting this deal. We are looking at what the judge explicitly called a manufactured lawsuit, where the Treasury Department is being sued by someone who effectively controls the Treasury Department. gaining the imprimatur of judicial legitimacy for a $1.8 billion payout when the exact same team is playing offense and defense sounds less like a legal settlement and more like a heist with a gavel. What is the actual civic danger when the legal system is manipulated like this?
The primary danger is the complete erosion of the adversarial legal process, which is, the absolute bedrock of the judiciary. Judge Williams noted that there was never a genuine controversy in this case. A fundamental requirement for any lawsuit is that two opposing sides are fighting over a real legal dispute. When the government can unilaterally agree to a settlement that earmarks billions of taxpayer dollars to redress grievances not even defined in law, the judiciary basically ceases to be a check on power. It just becomes a rubber stamp for executive self-dealing.
Well, the judge didn't just throw the case out. She actively blocked this settlement from being cited in any future proceedings and heavily sanctioned Trump's lawyers, explicitly barring attorney Daniel Epstein from appearing in the Southern District of Florida for a whole year.
And the severity of those sanctions highlights how aggressively the court is trying to protect those legal boundaries. When the executive branch attempts to bypass the legislative power of the purse by manufacturing a lawsuit to pay itself, the court has to drop the hammer to prevent that legal loophole from becoming a permanent choke point for taxpayer funds.
Seeing high-level political connections overriding public interest in Washington shares a really striking parallel with a massive protest movement currently unfolding in the Balkans. Environmentalists in Albania are fighting a very similar battle, watching their government rewrite rules to accommodate foreign capital. Thousands of people are in the streets of Tirana daily, demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Edi Rama. The unrest is centered on the Vihose Narta protected area. This is a vital wetland habitat for flamingos and Mediterranean monk seals, but foreign developers are planning to pave over it for massive luxury resorts.
This development involves a $4.6 billion investment directly linked to Jared Kushner's affinity partners. To facilitate a project of this scale inside a protected nature reserve, the Albanian government simply amended its protected area laws back in February 2024. They created a carve-out for what they categorized as strategic investments, which is a move the European Commission heavily warned deteriorates nature conservation and undermines Albania's broader environmental commitments.
Albania's booming tourism sector is now approaching a quarter of its GDP, so it looks remarkably like a modern gold rush. The state is acting as a regulatory choke point, opening the gates for billions in foreign investment while shutting out domestic ecological laws. Prime Minister Rama is defending these moves by claiming the protests are merely the work of, quote, anti-Trump forces, and that these luxury resorts are a gift to Europe.
Framing domestic environmental concerns as an international political conspiracy allows the Prime Minister to completely deflect from the core mechanism at play, which is the privatization of ecologically sensitive public land. The protesters are actually calling this the Flamingo Revolution. They are not reacting to U.S. politics. They are reacting to a government changing the rules of the game mid-match. When a state alters its conservation laws specifically to clear the path for a single multi-billion-dollar development, it establishes a clear precedent that economic imperatives will consistently override environmental protections. Just a quick note for you listening. For more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, visit clarinoratio.com.
The environmental sacrifices being made for rapid economic development in Albania actually find a fascinating parallel in another massive infrastructure project currently reshaping the coastline of East Africa.
Let's look at Kenya, where Nigerian billionaire Aliko Dangote has confirmed that Lamu Island, which is a pristine UNESCO World Heritage Site, will be the location for a $17 billion oil refinery. This facility is projected to produce 700,000 barrels of fuel per day.
The economic rationale driving this massive industrial pivot is the desire to insulate East Africa from the exact kind of fuel shocks currently threatening the Strait of Hormuz. A regional refinery of this size theoretically provides localized energy security. The friction points emerge when you realize this represents a massive pivot back to fossil fuels for Kenya, which is a country where over 90% of electricity is currently generated by green energy, predominantly geothermal and hydro resources.
The financial realities of this project demand some serious scrutiny, though. Dangote requires strict anti-dumping protections to prevent cheaper fuel imports from undercutting his new refinery. Furthermore, his proposed initial public offering to fund this construction hasn't even been approved by Nigeria's Securities and Exchange Commission yet. If a $17 billion project requires the government to artificially block competitors just to survive, you have to ask, is this genuinely about African self-reliance? Or is it just a politically motivated job creation tactic for President William Ruto's upcoming 2027 re-election campaign?
The political timing is definitely the undeniable driver here. President Ruto is facing a very restless electorate and incredibly high youth unemployment. Securing a $17 billion industrial project in coastal swing counties provides a highly tangible narrative of economic progress ahead of an election. But the requirement for anti-dumping protections indicates that this refinery is likely not globally competitive on its own. It requires state intervention to enforce a local monopoly.
And Kenyan citizens have historically rebelled against deals that appear to unfairly corner the market or offer excessive tax incentives to foreign billionaires, which makes the political risk of these state guarantees extraordinarily high. While nations scramble to secure capital, energy, and localized monopolies, they are simultaneously struggling to manage the movement of human beings, pivoting to the severe migration crackdowns currently unfolding.
The sheer volume of the numbers coming out of South Africa is stark. Over 53,000 foreign nationals, predominantly from Malawi, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique, have been deported in the past 5 weeks alone. This mass expulsion follows violent anti-migrant protests driven by the country's severe unemployment rate, and the government has framed this mass removal as a migration management campaign.
The contrast with Germany is just jarring. Germany desperately needs migrant labor to sustain its economy, particularly in elder care and healthcare, but they are completely failing to retain the workers who actually arrive. According to a new study, 60% of migrants leaving Germany return to their home countries, driven away by suffocating bureaucracy, agonizing waits for their professional qualifications to be recognized, and outright discrimination. Take this specific example of foreign-trained acute hospital care workers. They arrive in Germany to fill a critical shortage, only to find themselves relegated to basic nursing home care without prior warning because their credentials get stuck in an administrative meat grinder. How do we unpack this global contradiction where one wealthy African nation is forcefully ejecting labor in a resource panic, while a wealthy European nation slowly bleeds the skilled labor it desperately needs due to administrative rigidity?
It highlights a universal failure to treat migration as a human reality rather than a mechanical input. South Africa is utilizing physical deportations, treating migrants as scapegoats for systemic domestic failures, and choosing mass expulsion over addressing the root causes of unemployment and service collapse. Germany, conversely, treats migrants as components that must fit perfectly into a rigid bureaucratic machine. When a highly trained hospital worker is demoted to basic care because a piece of paper takes 8 months to process, the system actively alienates the exact talent it spent millions trying to recruit.
Both nations are letting political and administrative fears override the actual needs of their economies. They are acting as brutal choke points, one physical, one bureaucratic, completely ignoring the dignity of the people caught in the middle.
Moving from the hardening of administrative borders, there is a rare and historic exception happening right now at the southern tip of the Iberian Peninsula, where a border is actually vanishing.
Right, on Wednesday, July 15th, the 118-year-old border controls between Gibraltar and Spain are scheduled to be entirely removed, aligning the British overseas territory with the Schengen-free travel zone.
The human impact of removing this choke point is profound, particularly for the 15,000 Spaniards who cross that border daily from La Línea de la Concepción, which is a region currently suffering from nearly 30% unemployment. The agreement promises complete fluidity of people and goods, officially ending a legacy of physical division that once included a 13-year total blockade imposed by Spanish dictator Francisco Franco.
The deep political irony of this moment is inescapable. Gibraltar voted 96% to remain in the European Union, yet the ultimate result of the UK's Brexit, which was a movement fundamentally predicated on hardening borders, has resulted in Gibraltar surviving by integrating its border completely into the European Union, swapping its historic VAT-free status for a 15 to 17% transaction tax just to maintain trade.
The stories we have examined today really do not share a single unified direction. Instead, they reveal a world moving in incredibly contradictory ways. The United States and South Africa are erecting hard barriers through naval blockades and mass deportations, while Europe and Gibraltar erase a century-old boundary. Meanwhile, massive sums of capital are reshaping local environments in Albania and Kenya, entirely regardless of local ecological concerns.
Consider that toll booth in the ocean we started with. The choke points of the world, whether they are physical straits in the Gulf, bureaucratic bottlenecks for immigrants in Germany, or legal immunity loopholes in Washington, ultimately dictate who holds power and who pays the price. For slower context on international law, check out Debate Candy, and I invite you to visit clarineratio.com for more daily world briefs and classic audiobooks. Think about the invisible choke points quietly shaping your own community today, deciding who gets to move forward and who is forced to wait.